to present, and yeah, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. Okay, let's get started. And we are starting with Ellie Gemburg from KPF and Boston Seaport. Ellie, take it from here.
Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure to meet everybody on this webinar. And thank you very much to Nama and everyone else for the invite to speak with all of you. My name is Ellie Gamberg. I'm a design principal at KPF, and I'm going to share some of our collective experiences. And this was a team of many people that have worked on the project designing Seaport Square Innovation District. So Seaport Square Innovation District was a project that started around 2006. It was completed around as a master plan around 2010 and has been being delivered in phases ever since. And really Boston at the time, which is a very polycentric city, Boston only refers to a very small area. Cambridge, Somerville, Quincy, these are all separate cities within the greater Boston metropolitan area. It had a really big issue in the early 2000s, which is number one, that it had a lot of vacant industrial land that was very near the downtown. So the area of the master plan in question is everything that you see in white on the screen here. But the bigger issue was that even though it had some of the world's leading universities, it had a very big difficulty in terms of starting and scaling up companies. So this is as recently as actually 2011. So this is just after the master plan wrapped up. You could see that Boston was a very distant third to places like the Bay Area and New York, and kind of tied with smaller cities like San Diego, just in terms of the amount of venture capital invested startups and companies. The area that had been laying fallow for about 50 years was this area of the seaport. So what you see here in the distance is the 4 Point District, which is a collection of Civil War and antebellum era warehouses and an entire area of railroad tracks that by the 1950s had been turned into one of the larger parking lots on the East Coast, and had sort of lain such as about 50 years. The master plan as resolved sort of set out an open space strategy, a public realm strategy, bulk and massing, and programming for various different kinds of buildings. And this photograph was taken about 3 years ago, and many of the buildings in gray actually have been completed since. Actually, this was taken just before COVID. One of the questions that we really tried to set out to answer as part of this master plan is really, what do we mean when we say innovation, and how can a neighborhood drive innovation? And the thesis, or the theorem, that we tried to develop the design from was this idea that innovation is the ability to create new ways of thinking by basically getting different kinds of people from different walks of life to come and approach ideas and problems, whether they're social, technological, artistic, or otherwise, from different angles. And it's this notion of the diversity of input that creates new ways of thinking, which means by necessity, it needed to be a place that was about bringing different kinds of people together to do different things. Before we get into the master plan itself, I guess one of the questions would be, was this plan successful? And a number of metrics, one could argue that it was. So in the years since, Boston has caught up. This was number of biotech startups in 2020. And you can see here that Boston has almost the same number of startups and the same investment in startups as Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley has over twice the population, nearly 2.5 times. It's also spawned an incredible startup community. So not only has Seaport District become the headquarters for things such as Vertex Pharmaceuticals and General Electric moved their headquarters here about 2 years ago, but also there's a very robust ecosystem of small startup companies in all areas of disciplines, from technology to TAMI to creative and to medical research, that have congregated here. The idea of the master plan was then to start with this idea that Boston is a key node in a broader area of urban density stretching from south of Washington, D.C., inclusive of New York, all the way up to Boston, and that Boston offered things that these other metro areas didn't offer in terms of academic strength. But the key was to try to create a neighborhood that didn't just cater to the needs of businesses, but actually created a neighborhood that had places to play, places to relax, places to live, and places to work. The approach to the master plan started with this idea of inheriting the existing grain of the 4 Point District and combining with the larger scales of buildings from the existing functioning seaport to the east to create the kinds of spaces that could cater to anything from small apartments all the way up to larger research laboratories, all in one integrated neighborhood. And you can see that approach of scaling up in diverse scales from the sort of smaller fine-grained scale around the 4 Point District up to the medium-sized residential buildings and larger lab buildings in the serial photograph that's actually now taken about a year ago. Another key idea was creating a network of open spaces. And one of the challenges in innovation districts is also this notion that they don't happen all at once, and you need all the ingredients for success to come out of the box, so to speak. You can't wait for future phases to provide what you need day one. So rather than one large park, the idea was to create a network of smaller parks. And instead of one fun street, the idea was to create a network of separate streets that could each become lively as they came online. So as an example, instead of one main park, there was one smaller square park, which became the Seaport Square that everybody talks about. And we got a lot into this idea of soft programming, how it would be used throughout the year, so that it's become a center of yoga and outdoor exercise. And believe it or not, there are people out there, even in the middle of winter, doing outdoor yoga. It's become a place for relaxation that ties to other smaller parks in the area, down to even having a dog park so that people would have a place to live. And the other thing is, it wasn't just passive recreation. So one of the key concepts early on was the idea that every amenity, every open space also had to be this idea of creating a catalyst for people to live, work, and innovate. So a key part of the initial phase of the park was also what was called the district hall. And the idea of the district hall, and at the time it was thought would be a temporary building, but since then people have decided to keep it for the foreseeable future, was to create a kind of touchdown space or sort of node of activity where there'd be coffee, beer, bookable meeting spaces, meeting rooms, printing rooms, a kind of genius bar where people could get services either in terms of figuring out how to do things with the city or with the developer in terms of finding space. And also an event space where there would be hackathons, mixers, for people working in advertising or technology. And so the idea that that became a node that activated the park became really important. The parks were not the only kinds of open spaces, so it was really important to make sure that there were a variety of open spaces throughout the plan that were catering to different types of people. And this is important. The idea of appealing to a diverse group of visitors, residents, inhabitants, and workers was really central to the concept of the master plan. So these are just some examples of some of these other open spaces. And today, this idea that there's porosity, that one can find a mix of different building typologies, different kinds of spaces, different programming throughout the seaport has kept people coming, even as the neighborhood has continued to grow in volume, in price, and in success. I think the last thing is really focusing on this issue of diversity and inclusion, because if neighborhoods like this are only about one kind of group, there's only one kind of new work or new ideas that can be spawned. So I think the last thing is that very central to this issue of how the neighborhood would work was also this issue of housing and making sure that housing appealed to a number of people. Certainly that would mean commercial housing and affordable housing in traditional senses, but a central tenet of this also was to develop something that was called innovation housing at the time, which is the idea of larger shared units that, while not strictly affordable, did create spaces for people that were recent graduates or recent arrivals to Boston to live in larger groups in order to be able to actually stay in the neighborhood and not get priced out of it as the neighborhood became more successful. And the idea that this community is mixed income and has people that are young, older, people that are employed in the neighborhood, employed elsewhere, all living together, I think has been really key to the success and the ongoing growth. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Scott to talk about the next project. And thank you guys very much for your time.
All right, Ellie, thank you. So I'm Scott Page. I am the founder of Interface Studio. We're based in Philadelphia, an urban design company based in Philadelphia. And I want to speak to something that comes up frequently in any city that we're working in. If there's not already an established innovation district, what I will hear is, we need an innovation district. And our first question is always, well, what does that mean for you in this place? So there are certainly established innovation districts across the world. What can we learn from those innovation districts and apply them to places that are not on the national or international stage? So this is where my brief talk comes from here, innovation districts for the rest of us. And it's reasonable that there's such a powerful drive to create innovation districts. Stephen Johnson wrote a book, Where Good Ideas Come From, where he tracks over time how even small cafes in London were spawning innovation and doing exactly what the definition that Ellie provided around what innovation is intended for. Right? So there's a long history of this because it drives urban growth. Right. So then if I ask people what an innovation district is, and they're somewhat familiar with the concept, they'll talk about Kendall Square, maybe the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, Texas Medical Center in Houston. These are all international examples of what works when this really takes off. But for smaller cities that might not have the same resources, venture capital, institutions, or at least in the same amount, what is it that we can learn from these districts and apply? So to add to some of the definition around innovation, one of the things we always keep in mind is that talent and money have choices, right? So we really have to think about the choices that they're making. Talent needs to find money, talent needs to find talent, they need opportunity, and the best place to really bring them together is in designing these very unique places where they can come together. So that becomes kind of a foundation where we look at districts as a whole. And we think about the range of space that's available, everything from affordable small startup space to space that companies can grow into, to space for established companies that are doing different things. And we work with an economist who works very closely with businesses to understand what their actual physical needs are, because they need to be embedded within this work. And of course, as Ellie said, the places need to be unique. It is interesting that even places like the Research Triangle Park, and other spaces like that are starting to integrate things like food trucks and yoga and pop-up events, because they're recognizing that they also need to take a page out of the downtown playbook, which is these places need to offer a diversity of experiences to continue to draw a diversity of people. So with all of that said, I wanted to talk about Richardson because it's a city that not a lot of people outside of Texas have heard of. It is a city within the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. For those that are unfamiliar with the Metroplex, as it's just called in shorthand, Dallas and Fort Worth are the two of the largest cities in the United States. They're certainly two of the fastest growing cities in the United States. And between those two cities, there is a whole network of cities, some of which are 250, 300,000 people, the size of St. Louis. Richardson, which is labeled here as the telecom corridor because it was established around Texas Instruments. That's where Texas Instruments was founded, and the suppliers wanted to be close to Texas Instruments. It's on this map, but you can see of all of these diversity of places that you can work, where there's industrial activity, there's offices, there's research, it's across the Metroplex. So how does Richardson stand out if we take the lessons from other innovation districts and start to apply them to the scale and the needs that are specific to Richardson? What we are offered as the telecom corridor is 1,200 acres of this flex 1970s industrial space. Unfortunately, this is what we were asked to work with, right? This is the legacy of those suppliers and the growth of tech companies in the 70s. I think you get the idea. I could flip through these all day. You'd see much of the same. And there is some opportunity within these buildings because of their age and because they are outdated, both from an office standpoint and an industrial standpoint. So we needed, as designers, to really dive into these 1,200 acres and say, okay, what is the palette that we're working with? What are the existing building types? How are they functioning? How are they not functioning? Who are they actually serving well and who are they just failing? And what are really the opportunities across this district? And so we map all of this out. You see like a ton of it is that flex 1970s flex space, which when you really look at it, the opportunity for that flex space is that it provides affordable workspace, which is something that is in dire supply and in dire need within the Dallas Metroplex. So this is something that could be of real benefit, but it needs to be more than just a logistics building or a flex building. It needs to be connected to a place that offers experiences, that has services, that is moving towards a collective goal. So we think of this as an issue of economic infrastructure. Let's talk about what Richardson already has in this district, and let's talk about what it needs. What it has is a bunch of flex space, a little office space, it has a big data center. What it needs are not just a repositioning of those flex buildings, but opportunities for new modern flex buildings that can offer a range of spaces for different size businesses. It does need a signature space, a place where people can come together and businesses can access services. We need to tap into some of the existing research in the Metroplex, and there has been a growing life sciences sector in the Metroplex, although we keep losing them to Cambridge. But that has evidently been slowly changing with a lot of very specific investment. So these are the opportunities that we're playing with. And so when we look at the 1,200 acres, we took a very simplified land use approach here, which is, look, not all of this can be a mixed use center. There's context here, there's Texas. I think we want to put our cards in one mixed use center where we say, do everything here. That's right at their transit station. transit is pretty important for Richardson. That should be the place where we really do bring everyone together and create a front door. The rest of this district, we need to think about how we're repositioning what we're being given. So when you walk out of the transit station in Richardson, this is what you see. I can't remember how many parking spaces it is, but it's a very large parking lot that is owned by the Transit Authority. So we started to come up with a traditional grid, right? A walkable grid of streets that would help to create that front door at the transit station. There are some existing owners embedded within this. So the grid of streets had to accommodate not just the opportunity to redevelop the parking lot, but also future opportunities to redevelop adjacent properties when those businesses decide they would like to go. So this is a scalable project over time, and it was very much comes from a lot of on-the-ground outreach and work with existing property owners. Like a lot of these plans, we're looking at things around density, mixing density. So the Innovation Center here is very much based on a similar idea Ellie just talked about in Boston, right? That hub where everybody comes together. And in fact, I think Richardson was quite interested in what was happening in Boston around that kind of an initiative. And that is something they're investing in today with the University of Texas, Dallas, which is not too far from this district. We're an integral partner to everything. But we also needed to think about what that front door really looks like. This is Greenville that separates the transit station from the rest of these 1,200 acres. It's essentially a highway. We had to work very closely with the city manager and the region to think about how we could actually repurpose the street into something that's more walkable, more bikeable, and would really provide a good setting for new investment and density. But even for the locations not around that transit center, we get back to that question of how do we reposition the rest of the 1,200 acres? Some of this is about changing the rules. Some of this stuff was built at a time when the parking requirements were way higher than they needed to be. We have lots of parking that goes unused, particularly around some of the office buildings that are in the 1,200 acres. By changing some of those rules and creating some incentives, we can really look at opportunities to create space for new modern construction that would help to augment what's on the ground. But even in changing the rules and just allowing more flexibility, we can create spaces in parking lots that are unused for things like greening, stormwater management, pop-up programming, things that would help to tie different parts of this district together. And with that, and with 1,200 acres to work with, we actually created a number of sub-districts that each have their own identity. That identity then helps to identify how each sub-district is connected to the whole, connected to transit, and what the specialization really is. And so that identity gets applied across a number of different things, including some of these older buildings. But the program also looks at assistance to help renovate the interior of these buildings, to modernize and to better market and bring folks together to recognize that these are actually really valuable and important spaces within the Metroplex. And this is why this plays a really specific role. So it's no longer called the Richardson Innovation District. It's now called the Innovation Quarter, IQ for short. I thought that was clever. That's some marketing that was done after our work. And I think they've made some real progress, which is amazing. But one of the things I like to remind everybody when we talk about innovation districts, because when I get asked that question, I want an innovation district in my city. Even if the answer is yes, and that makes some sense, let's define what that is for you. It takes a long time. Research Triangle Park was founded in 1959. Major construction in Kendall Square in the 70s. And so we are just seeing what, 50, 60, 70 years on, the evolution of these places that have hit an international stage and have really spawned a lot of innovation and urban growth. And now they're in a different kind of condition, which is to try to manage that growth. So it takes time. As designers, I really get excited by this because it's a long game, but there are short-term moves we can make that will really help to drive some momentum and generate some excitement in the idea that hopefully takes a lot of hold. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague, Abel, to talk about Barcelona.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Abel. I'm Abel Porcar. I'm from Batlle Roig, an architecture studio here in Barcelona. I'm the urban planning director. I will show you a district that, as Scott was saying, it's already there for 25 years. So I think we had the time to see if it's working and how it takes time for this kind of innovations district to work. So I will start with a brief history of the city. You probably all know Barcelona. It was founded by it grew around the Roman city at first, and in the 19th century we had a quite good plan, 19th century plan. A 19th century plan for the expansion of the city. It was a very simple, let's say, simple grid. That the most famous part is the Eixample, which is next to the old city. But there was also that grid also grew much further from the old city, in the Poblenou area, and this area grew not as residential as the other parts of the grid, but as an industrial area. It worked as an industrial area for more than a century, but in the second part of the 20th century, it was clearly declining, and the city council started to think how it should be transformed. We were in a time where in Spain we had the housing bubble. It was very easy to transform to housing, but they thought we should keep the jobs and transform it into something different. So with the base of the grid, also around that area, several other developments happened, and with the base of the grid, you will see it's quite different from the other examples that we saw, because it's not, I wouldn't say it is a project, but it is more of a general urban planning that is concreted in is landed in several projects, in a lot of projects. The idea was that it must be a place for urban innovation, along with economic and social innovation, but mainly with a private development. So with the basis of the Cerdà block, the city council established a set of rules that are used to develop each of them, and the development of each of them is decided by the owners or by the market. So it has been quite an organic growing here. So the first rule is that some buildings should be preserved, some of them because are important from an heritage point of view, especially industrial heritage, others because they have useful uses, or some of them because even if they are industrial or commercial, they are well preserved and they can continue to be used. The second rule is that there will be there is a building rights attributed to each block, and they are increased if they are dedicated to what was called in that time new technologies, innovation, all this kind of businesses that in that time were very loosely defined, but still it attracted a lot of investors, and it was like the excuse for the developers to rent and sell the the buildings to all the innovation companies, communication companies, etc. And also a small part is dedicated to social housing, but it's only 10% of the buildings. Then apart from the preservation of the listed buildings, 10% is for land. The land is for public facilities, and another part of the land is for green areas. Each block has a plan, and it is approved by the city council. And each property must develop the green areas and the urbanization. And also a big innovation here was the establishment of district heating and cooling, which is the first in Spain, and it has grown a lot. That it takes advantage of several renewable energies from the sea, from the waste treatment plant that is there for the heating, and with all these set of rules, what happened from the approval of this plan, which is in 2000, the first years the area closer to the central city is the one that was more developed, because it had better transportation. It was near other commercial areas. But as I told you, it was quite organic. Some blocks the blocks that were prepared to be transformed, or that had only one owner, or whatever, they were transformed. And after 20 years, there was like a check of what happened, and everybody agreed that it had been a success, that it had attracted a lot of companies, national and international, a lot of international investment. Usually, many companies, when they want to establish in Southern Europe, they chose 22@, but also had some weaknesses, especially regarding mixed use, because even if the area is next to residential areas, it has itself very few housing, so it becomes quite deserted at night, and also because of the gentrification that it provoked in the areas next to it, because the 22@ is attracting technology jobs with good wage, and well, it was creating that kind of problems that are common to many cities. So a review of the plan was set up. It tried to preserve more of the existing buildings, especially housing. No, we already had more than 50% of the blocks developed, so it was a plan for the rest of the district. The building rights were a little increased, and there was a huge increase in the part of the development that must be devoted to urban housing, and there were new sustainability requirements for the buildings, and it was introduced also the idea of the super block that is being introduced in all the city. That it is the idea that most streets must be devoted to pedestrians and bicycles, and only some of the streets stay as roads. It's something that is being slowly implemented in all the city. So as I told you, it has a good image. It has been successful. We have worked, as you see, I'm not talking about my office because we are only part of the effort to develop. We have developed like 5 or 6 of these blocks with the detailed urban planning, more or less 30 buildings. But I show you some examples of the atmosphere that our buildings and the buildings around, because it's a collective effort, has created, and how well we have this kind of superimposed layers of an old grid, an 18th century grid, some old buildings, new green areas, new office buildings, and all of this has created a very interesting environment and a very interesting mix of uses. So now I think Michael Sorensen from Henning Larsen is explaining us the district in St. Louis.
Thanks, Abel. I hope you can see my screen. My name is Michael Sorensen from Henning Larsen Architects out of New York. We're a global firm, and I'm based in New York. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about, of course, innovation districts, but I wanted to share a project that's currently on the drawing boards that we're working on at the moment. So maybe a little difference than what we've seen earlier today. And also because this is one of the first innovation districts we're working on that incorporates industrial and really has employment at its heart. I think a lot of us know innovation districts today, and kind of how they maybe get skewed towards what you could maybe call white collar jobs, and this is an approach that we think is quite interesting, where we're looking at very employment forward industrial and mixing both industrial research and development and mixed use into one site. The project is sorry, I just need to make sure it's moving forward. Yes, sorry. The project is in St. Louis, on a site just south of the Arch that I think everybody knows, and I think it addresses an important issue at the moment, which is the need to address the construction industry, the need for looking at research and development within the construction industry in the US to address the fact that there's a need for new buildings and new construction throughout the years. And in that regard, St. Louis is very well situated. It sits at a node on the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers. It sits on the node that has all the trains and the highways that are connecting east to west. So it really becomes an area that is well connected to the rest of the country. And the idea here is to use that as an important driver of this plan, so that you can start to think about prefabrication or the construction industry or within the construction industry, and then being able to truck, trail, or sail that out throughout the country. And here you see, just zooming in, like any, I think, innovation district that we've also heard today, it's important that it's connected to a city that also has ties back to institutions. So in this case, we have institutions in the city. We have a population of about 300,000 people in St. Louis. So really getting all of these institutions and companies embedded in the project and getting the stakeholders to be part of the process. Right now, the project is at a phase where we are prior to the actual master planning. We're kind of doing feasibility studies and character plans to see what the potentials of the site are. And then after that, it'll start to move into an actual master plan stage. Here you see in the foreground, this is the actual site itself. You can see the elevated train tracks, the Mississippi on the right, the levee wall that prevents flooding of the site, and of course quite a substantial building stock on the site that has a heritage component. The boundary of the site ends with the elevated highway you see in the background before the arch, and to the left to the elevated highway that you see off to the left as well. And really the idea here, as I said, is to create a mixed use a district that is based on construction innovation, and it's based on returning industry and employment back to the city, so making that an integral part of the district, and then working with you could say, the existing heritage components on the site, and trying to create a new, of course, vernacular within this area, but also spurring jobs and opportunities within the broader district as well. I think as any good developer, a master planner, architect, urban planner, we're looking at the site's heritage and the components that are available to us. These are the buildings that have a legacy. It's the train tracks, it's the highways, it's of course the Mississippi River. Maintaining as many of these built opportunities and working with them in a positive way. It's about anchoring the cores or the districts. We have one district to the south that is mostly focused on manufacturing, and a district to the north that is mostly focused on the urban character and the connection back to St. Louis. And then, of course, utilizing as much of the green possibilities there are along the river and connecting back to the city, both from a pedestrian and a transportation standpoint. So just zooming a little bit on the left, you kind of see the way the site is set up at the moment. We're working with a manufacturing core to the south, which attaches also to the harbor on the Mississippi River, a cultural core which lodges itself between the manufacturing core in the south and the innovation district in the north, which blends the area back to the LaSalle district or back to LaSalle Park to the east, and then the innovation core, which is placed to the north and bleeds into the city. And around them, we have hybrid areas where we're working with a notion of light industrial research and development, mixed use. So these become the kind of a sponge that connects the city with the more hardcore industrial areas. A quick view of where the plan currently sits. You see the pink highlight is the Crandon Martin building. It's currently being designed and repurposed. It's a quite a beautiful heritage building on site, and will be the phase one, and then the phase one will grow from that. And then as it grows south, it will become more industrial in nature, which is attached to the new port. There's opportunities of connecting this site back to the city itself, but there's also opportunities of connecting the site across the Mississippi River and across to some of the areas that lie on the other side of the river as well. So really starting to become not just a innovation district on itself, but something that starts to have an effect that can impact a bigger area. Some of the things we're working with today, the Crandon Martin building, as I mentioned, has this beautiful spur. It used to have tracks running through the building. It was an industrial building, and the tracks and the train tracks are very present in the site. It's being repurposed today, so the center of this what was previously spur becomes a research and development space where people come together and work. And we're working with trying to manage or see how we can work with these elements, infrastructural elements that have a very rich history, and incorporating them into the built environment themselves. So here you see the Crandon building, Crandon Martin building on the left, the train that passes through. There's a spot on the train because it's a high density area. It's a very slow train that moves through this area. And the opportunity here is to work with these. So you're working with the infrastructure actively, working with spaces below these spaces that become maybe research laboratories or light industrial labs and so on, and then seeing how much we can densify and pack into this area. Most of our plans start, and I think Eddie talked a little bit about it with the seaport and the importance of the urban realm. what we're looking at here is really how does the microclimate inform our urban realm? What can we do to create outdoor areas that are conducive to gathering people, or creating spaces for gathering? Where do we want to put the retail? Where do we have least wind, and where do we have the most wind? And then working with our blocking and our massing to create an outdoors environment that is comfortable year round. So here you see one of the main pedestrian spaces that we're currently looking at an opportunity of using the existing light rails, or sorry, train tracks that have been that are no longer in use, using that as a kind of an elevated park, connecting it back to the neighborhood, but creating this very pedestrian focused, cycling focused area. And here you see a bit of a zoom in again on the neighborhood. You see this red line kind of shows the two main pedestrian axes we have, one north-south connecting back to St. Louis, and one east-west connecting the areas in the back to the Mississippi River as well. And then just lastly, you see here the Crandon Martin building as it stands today, beautiful heritage buildings that are being opened up in the future. So this really becomes an integral part of St. Louis in the city. And I think for us, it's interesting to work with these areas, especially thinking about industrial and employment, and how they can create new innovation districts that take us away maybe from the notion of offices and labs, and really start to think about another opportunity within innovation districts, thinking about how actually producing and living can coexist side by side, and creating neighborhoods that actually coexist with industrial, and that I think we know from cities like Barcelona that have a rich history of that. And then we are working and with district heating, with green infrastructure plans and water management throughout the site as well. And with that, I would hand it back to Nama.
Me? Yes. Hi. Okay. What I think it was fascinating that each of you was on a different intersection in the timeline, right? Like Michael, you're currently working on it, all the way to Ellie. Like we should have started it the other way around. So I have a question for you, actually for each of you. How do you, Michael, you're working on it right now, and Ellie, you showed us a project that already, came into fruition. And what can you share about how you're planning for the future? How do you, Michael, 20 years from now, what do you think, how much of it will, materialize? How do you count for that? How do you plan for that? Is there enough flexibility that you allow for? I kind of I want to hear from each of you. Michael, maybe we can start with you, just because going backwards, actually going on the right order this time.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, you're right. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now, so flexibility is of course key. I think we are trying, and of course, when you're working on this level where we are right now with this, it's kind of best guess. So we know what's going to be there in the future. We know we're going to have 500-year storms. We know that we're going to have sun, wind, daylight. All these components that create urban space are important. I think we have to, when we think about built form, you have to create flexibility, because we don't know if light industrial or if housing or where things are going to be going in the future. It's about looking at your land use and your zoning opportunities, so you don't lock yourself in. So really trying to talk about really mixed use and what does that imply. So I don't have a magic one. Maybe it's better to ask actually Eddie, because he's been through this whole process, and you can also see the changes that the Seaport has taken from the early design to where it is today. And you have to be able to follow that through time. But some things are constant, which you have to be aware of.
Maybe I'll take the baton and then hand it over to the others. So Michael, thank you for the reference, and to all the presenters. I do think that Seaport Square was an experiment, and while some were talking about innovation districts back then. As Scott mentioned, it wasn't everybody all the time the way that it is today. Seaport was a plan that actually survived multiple crises. So it was started in a moment of, let's say, Boston's introspective uncertainty in the early 2000s. It survived a financial crisis. It survived a COVID crisis, and it's evolved many times. Not only that, but the original developer and let's say financing and infrastructure group behind them has already changed to be a new group. So this is in fact a innovation district that not only has been planned, but is being replanned. And actually, we think that's a good thing. The fact that the district remains alive and can tolerate new ideas, new approaches. In fact, at the time, everybody thought the innovation area it would mostly focus on would be technology and fintech. And obviously now it's mainly a center of life science, as others have alluded to. I think this emphasis on rounding out innovation to really talk about issues of quality of life, inclusivity, and the sort of nature of the urban, or not necessarily always urban, but the kind of the civic experience is really, really important. And I think people have talked about the fact that cities like London, New York, Paris, Seoul, Hong Kong have been catalyzing innovation for a very long time. There are certain key ingredients in the way that a city can serendipitously bring people together that's really important. The challenge is that so much of today's civic and architectural infrastructure argues against that. We have zoning that separates uses. We have attempts to keep housing away from other things. We cluster all of our retail and shopping malls. So the idea, I think, common to a lot of these districts is to create flexible armatures that allow for the co-location of undetermined uses and experiences, in the hope that if the chemistry of that can evolve over time, then innovation can happen. And I think the testament of a neighborhood like Seaport is the fact that not everything was necessarily right. In fact, many things were probably wrong, but the armature was flexible enough that success could happen in the end. And that's certainly something we're carrying forward to our other projects.
Yeah, I build on that. I think that's a really good point around flexibility. There's so many rules that are antithetical to what we're all trying to create. And so it takes real conviction to be flexible. No one gets fired for following the rules, right? People get fired when they take a risk and it doesn't work. And so knowing that's embedded, particularly in the culture of American cities, I won't speak to others, that risk-taking is really a piece of this work. And so the conviction comes from really seeing early success. So that's where I talk about the fact this is a long game, but if you don't have early success, if you don't have an initial spark where you see some benefit, then that conviction can frankly fall off pretty quickly. And then the follow through on some of those really important rule changes and continued investment and partnership building falls by the wayside. So there is that early step that's really critical, but long term, who knows? 1,200 acres in Richardson could be completely different than we imagine it, but it could still be an innovation district. And so that's the important piece for us.
Yeah, I agree with all of you. I think, as Ellie was saying, flexibility is key, because we are all working in parts of the city that had a purpose before, and we are reusing them for something different. And most of them, I think they allow this change of uses. So maybe in 50 years or 60 years, we are changing into something different. I think from our experience, mixed use is very important. Our city is completely mixed use, most of it, and we still need more mixed uses in some parts, like here, where we trusted that it would not be a problem to have a business district, which we didn't have, and finally we realized that we need more housing there. So I think we are all learning, but we are seeing that we need this kind of integration and living cities, even for us, which we don't have the car culture that you have in America maybe, but The original plan required a lot of underground car parking that now has been lowered because we realized it was a waste of resources and money. But I think the important thing is that, at least in our case, we are working in a 19th century layout, and it still works. So that's, I think, the most important thing. And I don't know, the trees that are in the streets are more than 100 years. Some of them are lined trees, and it's a value that comes from the past, and probably we should keep some of our plans today in the future.
It's a very interesting and nice point to think about. One last question, because it's almost 11 here. So innovation and working from home. We know that innovation cannot happen if we don't have the concentration of people, and yet we see this beyond trend by this time. And we're also aware of the office market condition. Feel free to just jump in, but could it work? Innovation districts and the current work from home mentality?
I don't know if I would say that as we are architects, I think we might agree that working in the same place for most of the time is very important, at least for our experience.
We come to the office 5 days, but I'm sure Michael and Ellie will have a completely different experience from their teams.
5 days.
I think at least I think it happens for us, and it happens for many businesses. I can't talk for everybody, but if we make places that are attractive to go and people wants to meet there, well, I think it would be at least it will make a difference, and probably people will be more willing to go to the office. I don't know. I hope that we can create that kind of places.
Ellie, Michael?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about the programming and the mixed use component of that. It's very important. I mean, you have to have a district that has, a fair amount of residential, that you have people in the area. You have to think about what kind of business you're catering to. And I think that's at the heart of innovation districts today. We kind of see across the board that they are certain, as Ellie said, it's tech, then it's lab, and that kind of changes. Can you create a more robust district and put more people in that place with a large variety? That's why we think that, the notion of bringing light industrial into that puts people in that space every single day. And it might be robotics in the future, I don't know, but I think being cognizant of what you create and putting people on the ground with a purpose, that will help your innovation districts a long way.
And just to add to that, I think this discussion about remote versus not is really an indictment about some of the failed urban models that are around the world. Cities like London. So I'm simultaneously in New York and London. I'm based in London primarily, but I'm back and forth between both offices and work in both places that have really good equal transit. So in London, there's not the same penalty that you see in many American cities, where the further out you live, the longer it takes to get to work. Because of the trains, it's possible to live 15 miles away from the center and be in 25 minutes. The number of people that are in the offices is a lot higher than, say, New York and other places. And I think what that talks about is this idea that everybody's balancing the time lost away from family, away from work in the commute versus time with family, time with colleagues and stuff like that. I think the average person likes the people they're working with and actually does want to be around them. So really what cities need to do on a district level, as Michael was saying, is really foster a mix of uses like residential at all price points to enable those kinds of integrated communities, so people really can be walking or taking a short bike ride or commute to work. And then there's also the factors that go beyond any one neighborhood. And obviously we've all been talking about single neighborhoods. But things like investing in transit is far better than, you know, investing in just one house or another house here and there, because it opens up and integrates cities so much more. So I think at the end of the day, the ability of people from different walks of life, from diverse economic, cultural levels, educational levels, who work in different industries, bringing those people together is really important to how cities work. And if people are choosing to not take advantage of all the benefit that that has, everything from the social drink to the, you know, to the work meeting, then that's really an indictment that the cities are kind of failing to provide that level of amenity that's so necessary.
You're absolutely right. Okay, so Ellie, Abel, Michael, and Scott, thank you very much. For everyone who's joining us in the last week of August, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll meet again in September with transit-oriented development in new transit investment. So what happens when you build new transit and how you design around new transit. Thank you very much. Have a great